Happy Sabbath. Despite my best efforts to convince Shay that I was not a pastor and this was not a sermon and please don't bug me, it didn't work. And so here I am. So hopefully you'll find a blessing from this. This message was a long time in coming, about 30, how old am I? 34 years in coming. So you'll be some of the first to hear it. So I hated her, like really hated her. With passion, actually. Every time she was mentioned or someone would bring her up, I began to feel equal parts of anger and nausea just take hold in my heart. She seemed to me so perfect, and I hated that I felt completely inadequate next to her. Growing up, I always felt like I couldn't compete, and I wasn't complete or valuable unless I somehow looked and acted just like her. As time went on and I began to hate even the idea of her, I vowed that she was unattainable and trying to be anything like her was just a simple waste of time. Now, the crazy and weirdest part was I didn't even know her. I'd never met her. In fact, I'd never met anyone who had, yet so many men in my life had made her out to be this perfect 10. And I always felt lacking whenever her name was mentioned. So, you might be wondering, who was this woman that literally tortured my soul and made me feel as a young girl to be completely useless? Well, she doesn't have a name, or at least if she did, we're not privy to it. But most of us Christian gals will know her as the Proverbs 31 woman. Now, you might already have emotions that are evoking within your own heart. Maybe you're rolling your eyes, as I used to do when I heard her name mentioned. Perhaps you too, like me, were tortured by the idea of unrealistic perfection that this woman was used for. Maybe every Mother's Day you were told again and again how amazing this woman was. You may have been sitting in a church pew when you heard about her for the first time. Perhaps you too were told that this is just the type of woman you needed to be. Maybe a youth leader encouraged you to be more like her. Or maybe you dated a guy who told you that you weren't 31 material. Yeah, it happens, and more frequently than I'd care to admit. But maybe you were lucky to escape the torment that this woman was often used for. Maybe you thought of her fondly. You didn't look at her description with dread, but rather with anticipation. Maybe you were able to see the beauty in the passage. And maybe you're like, I've never heard of her at all. Whatever the case may be, you can't argue that her placement in Scripture is accidental. Like some story that a bunch of men worked in hundreds of years later to try and get their wives to iron their shirts. She's there, smack dab in the middle of Scripture, right in Proverbs, if we want to be specific. And her story is one of heroic poetry, but its intent is crystal clear. There's this woman, she's pretty awesome, and all women should try to be more like her. Not out of some necessity of perfection, but because God has called us up to rise. God has called us to rise up and be warriors that we were meant to be. Now, I'm going to give you a backstory here. You have to understand where all of this came from. So I need to tell you a little bit more about me. I'm an only child. You could call me spoiled, strong-willed, stubborn, smart-mouthed, silly. All of those terms would and are probably still very accurate. I come from a long line of strong-willed women. I know, it's surprising. Women who weren't afraid to make their opinions known. Silent is not an attribute the matriarchs of my family are known for. We speak our minds. We have things to say. We're smart. We're stubborn. Growing up, I was told I could do anything that I wanted to do, and I believed that I would do everything when I grew up. I quickly realized I had an aptitude for science and math. My parents did as well. And this became funneled into a passion for medicine and helping people as I grew up. Now, when I was growing up, all of my little girlfriends and I, we'd play games, including the game of house, right? We've all seen little girls and boys do it, right? We play house. Now, this really just bothered me because while my little girlfriends were sitting around, they had their kids' future names picked out, they were talking about kitchen sets, they were talking about husbands and being mommies. I was just not into any of that. I wanted to be an astronaut at the time, or maybe an astronaut doctor, or something that would change the course of history. I felt annoyed even as a child when my pretend husband would go off to work and I had to stay home and raise the pretend dollies. I was not thrilled at all. I was abhorred when my friends wanted to learn how to cook or sew or diaper their dollies. I had zero desire to pick out any future kids' names. Now, to my parents' credit, they never made me feel like I wasn't living out my destiny by desiring a husband or a home. They encouraged my love of science and exploration. But the church at large, little bit different story. I felt as a young girl completely trapped, like a man wasn't going to marry me unless I desired that housewife life. As I became a teenager, and admittedly quite rebellious, I really pushed back against all traditional notions of gender stereotypes. I didn't want to hear about some mild, meek-mannered woman, one who sounded like the perfect housewife. I didn't want to hear about staying at home or raising babies, sweeping the floor, fixing supper every night. To me, that felt very Cinderella-esque, but before the part where she marries the prince. I didn't want to hear about wives and their submission to their husbands. To me, this was antiquated nonsense, and I wasn't going to participate in it. Of course, the icing on the cake when I vowed to God at about 11 or 12 that I will never be a pastor's wife. I actually said it. Because to me, that seemed like the worst trap of all. Because then I would really have to embrace all that junk, and I was definitely steering clear of that. Now let's fast forward a little bit, and I'll spare you the details, but I did wander away from God. I never renounced my faith or became an atheist. I just sort of left everything on the back burner. You know, when you can't tell if the burner is on or off, you got to get really close to see. That's pretty much where life was at. I was super busy, and I definitely didn't want to hear all the ways that I was failing as a woman. I was in college, and then I was in medical school, and then I got married to that guy over there. And then there was residency and family and work. And the weird, or not so weird, obviously, thing is that during all of this time, God was orchestrating behind the scenes. I imagine he was probably doing a lot of smiling and maybe even a little bit of laughing, because despite my very best efforts to run far away, he always found a way to bring me full back to him. All right, now let's go back to that vow I made. You know, I'll never be a pastor's wife. So it's really funny how life works. My husband and I met when we were teenagers, Kmart to be very specific if you want to know. And I was the geeky homeschooled science nerd. And remember, I didn't really have much of an inkling towards boys or getting married. But boy, when I saw him, I sure fell hard. Sadly, it was a one-sided feeling. He wanted nothing to do with this. I know. Feel sorry for me. While we were close friends, he never had romantic feelings towards me. And then I moved on and went off to college, and we lost contact for a short period of time. And when I was in medical school, we reconnected, and everything was going well. Now, when we were teenagers back at Kmart, he told me at that point in time that he was called to ministry. And I thought, well, gross, whatever, you know. I just pretended like I didn't hear it. We were friends. He wasn't in the strongest spiritual space either, so I figured, that'll just be a fleeting thing. No big deal. Well, when we reconnected in medical school, again, we started dating. Everything was great. We got engaged. And then one day on the phone, he drops the bomb. He had been working on an engineering degree. And then he tells me, I feel like I'm being called to ministry again. Are you kidding me? What? No way. Deal's off. Here's the ring. Bye. Sayonara. See you later. Adios. Okay, I really didn't say any of that, but all those emotions really ran through me because this was not part of the plan. I told God I was not going to be a pastor's wife. And now I love this guy. So what am I supposed to do? Like most immature girls in their early 20s, I just swept that under the rug, put that in a box with a lid on it. We'll deal with that later. I figured it was a bridge I'd cross at a later date. Future Kelly's problem, right? Besides, so much can happen, right? If he feels called, well, maybe he'll feel uncalled. That sounds terrible to say, and you're right, it was terrible, but that was where my heart was at, and I feel like I have to share that with you so you really understand how all of this came to be. Now, between there and here, there's a ton more of story that I can share, and maybe I'll get to do that with you guys at a later date. But if you're wondering if he got uncalled, he went before ordination council last weekend, as you guys were there and heard, and he'll soon be an ordained minister, hopefully. All right, God, I get it. You were right. Stop laughing, please. So here I am, a pastor's wife, after it's all said and done, the one thing that I absolutely never wanted to be. Now, after I stopped hyperventilating in a paper bag, mostly kidding, I began doing a lot of self-reflecting. In fact, I've been doing that for about a year now, about the time he became an assistant pastor. And I've really been trying to piece together this pain that's in my past, the wounds left by the church that I grew up in, the expectations that I had held myself to as a kid, the reasons why, the true reasons why I was running from God. I often joked in the past that I was a modern day Jonah, except that's really not funny, and I'm very lucky that I didn't actually get swallowed up by a giant fish. As I began to reflect on what my role was as a woman, a mother, a doctor, a businesswoman, a child of God, and now a pastor's wife, I felt like sharing this was a necessity. Now, the strong, independent woman is still very much alive in my soul. You can talk to me for about 5 minutes and you'll know that. And it's always going to be. And I truly believe that God coded my DNA that way. So now I'm left to try and reconcile what it means to be a godly woman in the 21st century. Have you guys ever wondered that too? Is she meek and demure, the doormat of the family, with a sole purpose to make and raise babies and serve dinner and stay silent? I'd say no. However, I knew deep down that she was much, much more than I was or had ever given her credit for. I knew that she had answers to the internal dilemma that I felt within my soul. So, for the first time in a very long time, I blew off the dust of my preconceived ideas of what a Proverbs 31 woman was and began to get acquainted with her on a much deeper level. Now, the first thing I did was actually read the entire passage, which is always helpful. Strangely enough, over all of my years of hating this woman, I had never read that passage from start to finish. Thankfully, my husband was able to provide me with his plethora of pastor books. I don't know the names, so I'll just say pastor books, so I could really dig in deep. Now, the purpose of this talk today is not to provide you with a full exegesis on Proverbs 31. I don't even think that I could do that at this point in time. But what I want it to do is serve as a launching point, a trajectory, an outline in your mind to begin to think about this. I want everyone here to see her for what she truly is, behind that shroud of misconception, shame, anger, fear, and doubt. I want the beauty of the passage to shine forth, for us to be able to translate that into today, so that all women can find hope in this crazy, fast-paced world. If you guys will turn with me to Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version. And I'm going to read the whole thing. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night. She provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hands she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchant with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Now, if that's your first time reading that passage, or perhaps reading it all the way through, congrats. Now, perhaps you're thinking, okay, so what does this all mean? This woman sounds crazy busy, crazy tired, and if that's the mark of an absolute biblical wife, yeah, I'm out. Well, a few years ago, I would have totally agreed with you. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm still trying to reconcile it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never gone to the store to buy wool or flax. I don't make my own clothes, and I don't have a household full of my own employees, although some days it would be nice. All right, I'm being a bit facetious here, but only to prove a point. How do we as women today who are striving to live godly lives wrap our heads around this passage? How do we update this for today? Make it understandable and relatable to the lives that we're currently living. That's the goal, right? We crave and need relevancy in a world that really doesn't have any. Now, I read some Bible commentaries on this passage, and the more I did, I began to really fall in love with this woman. I mean, really, I truly admire her. She's downright amazing. Not some quiet, demure, meek little housewife I'd been made or led to believe. She was actually really incredible. Not someone sitting around just naming babies, talking about kitchen furniture. Let's break this down just a little bit more. In verses 10 through 12, this woman here is referred to as a strong and excellent wife. The whole passage itself is heroic poetry, which would be akin to somebody talking about a hero of war. Okay? That's the reverence and the type of language that's used to describe her. Her husband trusted her completely. When they say they will have no lack of gain, the translation here refers to the spoils of war. This woman was one of the main reasons her husband and family are well off. She's an ally and a true asset to him. While she is a hard woman to find in today's world, I believe it is possible that we can all strive to be more like her. In verses 13 through 15, here we see this woman being able to provide the things that her family needed for clothing. Doesn't talk about her husband just bringing home a paycheck, right? She provided stuff. She was a tradeswoman and a very savvy businesswoman. If you remember, it says she took her earnings and went and invested them. In today's world, this could translate to you running a business, providing extra income for your family, and working hard to be conscientious with the household finances. In verse 15, the word food that is used is translated to mean prey. Now, I absolutely love this because what it does is gives her an imagery of being a hunter or maybe even a lioness. She is not some damsel in distress, fanning herself and clutching her pearls. She sought what she needed, and she didn't wait for provisions to come to her. Time wasn't of importance. She was ready and available whenever someone needed her. She truly had a servant's heart. In verses 16 and 17, we see that this woman is an entrepreneur. She takes her own money and invests it again. She knows how to turn a profit. She is very strong. She does nothing half-hearted. In the Hebrew text, where it talks about girding her loins, basically taking her tunic and tucking it up so that nothing gets in her way. This woman is, in some imagery, a warrior. She does everything with preciseness. She is strong. She doesn't let anything get in her way. In verses 18 through 20, here we see her business efforts as paying off. Now, the imagery of her lamp is twofold. Not only does it burn late into the night because she's busy working the businesses that she has, but also because she's secured enough finance for the house to ensure that that oil does not run out. Now, when you see her working the spindle, here it implies that while she is successful, she is not vain or arrogant. She's done well for herself, but she's extremely humble. She remembers her responsibilities and doesn't feel above or elite to anybody else. She has compassion for the less fortunate. She sees need in others and tries to help where she can. In verses 21 and 22, you see her taking care of her entire household. And that's not just her children. That's a full household of servants and people running that estate. Everyone is provided for. Now, interestingly enough, her clothing is dyed scarlet, which indicates a degree of royalty or wealth, meaning she takes care of others, but she also takes care of herself. She is a dignified woman. Now, this passage isn't to imply that obtaining massive wealth is the end goal here, but really to be dutiful with what you have and aspiring to take care of your family. In verses 23 to 25, we see that because of her husband can pursue his business endeavors. He's well respected because of her. They're a team. There is no one without the other. Without her, he couldn't do what he does, and without him, she can't do what she does. It's complete balance, equality. She is truly an entrepreneurial woman, as it again mentions her trading and business transactions. But beyond her beautiful looks or clothes is her amazing character, because that's what truly matters. She is strong and dignified. She isn't afraid of the future. She is solid in what she's built and the God who has helped her. This woman in verses 26 to 27 is extremely wise, and she passes that wisdom down to her entire household. She's a teacher. Now, she does everything with kindness because she's motivated by love. She watches over her entire household. She's likely organized and attentive and very perseverant. In verses 28 and 29, you can see that her family absolutely adores her. Her husband and children recognize what a treasure she truly is. They proclaim it and share it boldly and loudly. They praise her. The word nobly here translates to excellent. So in today's vernacular, that might be, she's the most excellent of the excellent. She has value to her husband, her household, her children, and her community. Verses 30 through 31 says that she deserves praise. She can be beautiful and charming, but again, that's not what matters. It's her heart. It's her character. She fears the Lord and puts him first above all. She has a close walk with God, and because of that is a bastion of wisdom and honor. This woman deserves to be recognized by her family and society and rewarded for the important kingdom work that she does. Now, these are the type of women we need to be celebrating as a society, not movie stars. We need to be upholding these type of women to not only ourselves, but to our daughters and all of the women in our life. Of course, no one's perfect, but man, I'd like to hang out with some women like this, wouldn't you? I want my daughter to grow up to be this kind of woman. Hardworking, smart, kind, savvy, good with money, praised for her kindness and gentle spirit. Nothing in these passages indicates that a woman needs to be meek, quiet, demure, behind the scenes, or some sort of second-rate citizen. In fact, here she's pretty much in the spotlight all the time. She's known for her work. She's a mover and a shaker in society. She's educated. She's a warrior, a hunter. She's fiercely loyal. She's a rare treasure indeed. So how do we, as women, attempting to live godly lives in today's society, take these concepts and mold them into relevancy? Well, to me, the crux of the passage comes down to this: living a God-centered life, using the talents and gifts, whatever they could be, because they're going to be varied, to bring honor to God, to our families, to our community, to everyone in our sphere of influence, to uplift people, to be a help, to work hard, to teach others, and then to mold another generation into these truths. Is it easy? No, not at all. Times, to me, have never been more confusing. The waters of cultural relativism, equality, millennialism, they're just tricky to navigate. Peril often lurks around every corner. However, I'm convinced that it's time for a new generation of women to arise. Women who aren't afraid to live boldly, to stop hiding, to quit being scared of the talents that God's given them, and to wake those talents up if they've been burying them, and let them shine forth brightly, to bless others, to live a life that's balanced, to stop feeling shame and guilt over who God created them to be, to realize that all of us at one time or another have probably felt that way, and then to band together to show the world just how amazingly strong and courageous the women of God can truly be. So, A modern day 31 woman. Is it possible? I know I believe in her. I know she's out there. And I know with God's help that we can be one of them. But my question to you today is this: do you? Let's pray.